Hello and a warm welcome to all of you. It's such an honor to participate in this wonderful discussion hosted by the New Indian Express, and it's so wonderful to see all of you in the audience. Well, we really start with our young panelist, Ms. Samita Arni. We will be asking you the questions. First of all, how do you feel connecting, all this? And how do you feel looking at the corrections made in history? Will it have an impact on the social dynamics of this country?
So there's also, I think Dr. Sampath also mentioned that there's also a lot of emotional motivations for what history is relevant at what time. And I think this is also very problematic because I'm also trained as a psychotherapist, and I often feel that we project our own emotions, our own states of being onto the narratives that we hear. So sometimes even what narratives are prompted or what narratives even take the center space of our imagination come from very emotional spaces. And I think it is a responsibility for us as storytellers, as writers, as historians, to also take that into account when we put our narratives out. So I feel... Oh, this is better? Okay. Yeah. So I definitely I feel that it has to be taken with some responsibility to really consider how these narratives, what we're putting out about history, how it is received by the audience, what it can be used to motivate people to do wonderful things. And history can also be motivated to make people do horrible things. So these things have to be taken into account and balanced. They say history is objective, but there is also a hugely subjective element in what draws us to write about certain things.
Professor Shastri, would you like to add something?
I was ready because when you said we'll turn to the youth in the panel, I immediately got ready to respond to your question.
Good one.
As a student of politics, I have always felt that if I have to understand what's happening in the political arena, if you ask me what's going to be the trend in 2023, in 2024, I definitely will have to go back to 1983 and then talk of the trend. So history in that sense is very important to relate to the future. But then my challenge is today, there is an interpretation of history to suit what I would like to say. I don't know if Chandan also shares that. We have a conclusion and then search for data to justify that conclusion. And that for me is the problem of excavating history in the way I would want to excavate it. If I'm able to excavate history with the data and then draw my conclusion, that is the type of history I'm looking at.
Dr. Chandan Gowda.
Before I say anything, so Gandhi, someone all of us are familiar with, never took an interest in history. If you read anything that he wrote, he's not reaching back to history to make any point about the present. And he got this attitude from observing how Indian families deal with disputes inside. So when brothers fight, he very famously said, when brothers fight, you say, let's forget about what's happened, let's think about living now. And this is an attitude he stretched to history as well. Because if you remember the Hind Swaraj book of his, 1909, an imaginary conversation between himself, the editor, and a reader who keeps telling him, come on, the Muslims ransacked temples, invaded us, etc., etc. What shouldn't we do something to take revenge now? Gandhi says, don't brothers fight. And when that happens, you have a different attitude towards the whole problem itself. The panchayat settlements of disputes is also like that. We're not bothering with objective evidence as much as we have to live together now. So let's remember accordingly. So there's an ethics of remembering that Gandhi always worked with. Now, that will not satisfy the historians who will want to know everything. So even when that's the orientation, a scholarly orientation, like Samita and Professor Shastri was saying, there is an element of responsibility about what you do with it. Let's imagine that we can conclusively prove that Aurangzeb did destroy a temple on the spot. Let's imagine we discover this conclusively. What does it mean today for anybody, outside of it being just a fact. The problem is it's not even about Aurangzeb, it's not even about the temple. It's about a large community that is symbolically associated with Aurangzeb and who are supposed to answer for what he did. And it's really none of their problem what Aurangzeb did or what anyone else did. So I think in the public, I think we need to have a very careful disentangling of these things. Let the historians discover whatever, but that must really have no consequence for communities in how they live and how they organize their own relations in today's times.
Mr. Murthy, your take, then we'll move on to the next question.
Please speak into the mic. Please speak into the mic.
I'll take the mic.
No, you have.
It's okay?
Yeah.
It is said that the greatest of the battles are civilizational in nature. The civilizational battles have been responsible for deaths of tens and millions of people for no mistake of theirs, for no role in any of these civilization things. So I guess history is important, relevant. It should be academic in nature, right? So we just had a very recently Russian President Putin connecting history to another neighboring country, and he goes with a narrative, he goes and conquers. He says that, we owned it some time back. How is it relevant even for the context of today? I think people need to understand how to move forward. These things exist. Sometimes it favors me, sometimes it favors you. I think moving forward, take it a pinch of salt, take it as a history, as an academic subject, maybe learn from it, and not get into civilizational battles, I think would be my answer to this.
Very well said, sir. Let's move forward from history to the present and then to the future elections that we are in the midst of. My question is to Professor Shastri. Electioneering has already started, dates have been set, battle lines have been drawn. Do we see a narrative across the country in this election like the earlier elections, or the national elections are fought locally on different issues in different states or rather in different districts? And also, BJP keeps talking about getting 370, 400 seats, and where are the numbers coming from?
Okay, let me come to the last part. Earlier, the second part of your question first, because that's the more interesting one. 2014 saw the BJP and the NDA concentrating on North India, West India, Central India. And the second time in 2019, they had a 87% strike rate in this region. In 2019, the focus expanded to East India and Northeast India, and they got 18 of the 25 seats in the Northeast, and that led to the 305 that they have. This time, very clearly, both in terms of optics and in terms of ground performance, the BJP sees the South as the region where they want to expand their presence. 130 seats in South India. Today they have 30 seats, which is a 22% strike rate compared to 87% of the North. And therefore, so much of emphasis on the South. And if they are looking at going beyond 305, that would be very difficult to achieve if not for the southern part of India. Because they have more or less maxed out in the north. You have 16 seats in UP that they are still looking at. There are 11 seats in Punjab which they are looking at. There are around 7 seats in Maharashtra they are looking at. And all these seats are not necessarily in their favor. And in focusing on these seats, they don't have the challenge is what happens to the seats you do have already. So that's the challenge they face there, and therefore this whole focus on the South. Is there a national narrative playing out? For the BJP, yes. They have a national narrative of projecting a leader who leads their campaign. And I have no shadow of doubt that all the NDA candidates will say in this election that I am not the candidate. You are just giving by voting for me one more seat to the Prime Minister. So that's their narrative. And they would like that to be the narrative because then all other things can be settled down. On the other hand, the opposition is seeking to build a narrative which varies from state to state. Because a lot of them are state-based parties. The Congress also is critical in certain states of India. So they are looking at that state, looking at their particular states and trying to identify what is the narrative, local narrative they can come up with. As of now, they have not fallen in the trap of making this a leadership contest. See, the common point that the ruling party makes is, we have a leader, who is your leader, tell us, and they are not responding. And I think from the angle of the opposition, that's a wise strategy. Because the moment you respond to that strategy, the battle is lost even before it has begun. Because leadership then becomes, you are challenging somebody in a leadership position for 10 years with somebody who has to become a leader within 3 months. On issues, on policy alternatives, and that's where I see that narrative is not as strong as it should be. It looks as if the Congress narrative is the only narrative. And that Congress narrative seems not to have been fully adopted by the rest of the alliance. Now, that's where there seems to be a little weakness in terms of projection. And if they get that act together, we may be seeing a more stiff race this time around.
Chandan Gowda, there's a lot of interest in South India, this time southern states. How do they perform? Because India Alliance performance or anti-BJP parties' performance at the national level depends largely on how the smaller parties do. Do you think this time BJP will be able to make inroads beyond Karnataka in other states? And given what happened in the recent assembly elections, will that be an indicator for BJP's performance?
One thing needs to be admitted straight away, whether they will win there was a survey that was saying they will not win a single seat in Tamil Nadu. Just imagine the amount of, attention that has got. We saw images of Modi listening to the Kamban Ramana being read at one point. I mean, the things that he has done, the Senghor in the parliament, etc., overkill, right? The determination to get into these states is high, but it's happening at the level of news and image distribution, etc. But people still think it won't translate into a single seat in Tamil Nadu this time. This is what, maybe they may get votes, but may not seats. So outside of Karnataka, I'm still not sure how the BJP will perform. I mean, of course, Telangana, they will get some seats, and they've tied up with Chandrababu Naidu in Andhra. That may also mean something for the NDA. But the BJP tally in itself, I'm not clear, and I think he may have a better sense for the actual figures, even by terms of probabilities. Kerala they're drawing a 0. Tamil Nadu is a 0 here. Karnataka, again, we were talking to someone during lunch break, and what seemed like a confident, like 20 for sure, doesn't seem to be that clear anymore. So there will be surprises. And what is driving those surprises will be something that we can tell after the event.
I think there are two strategies in the South. Yeah. There is one strategy they have for Karnataka and Telangana, and one strategy in the other states. In Karnataka, their challenge is to retain their last time's performance, which is 100% strike rate. Yeah, because they won 25 seats last time, they are contesting 25 seats this time. So now, of course, if you are a supporter of the alliance, you will say, no, it is not about BJP, it's about NDA. So it's 28 seats. But if you're talking of the BJP, to retain their strike rate, to retain their seats, it has to be 100% strike rate. So that's the challenge that they face in Karnataka, to be able to redo what they did last time. For the Congress, even if they get more than one seat, it's a better performance than last time, in a sense. And given the fact of the guarantees that the government is talking about, at the end of the day, I think perception matters. How does the voter, how does she look at these guarantees given by the government? Do they see them as something transforming their lives? Would they see that as an important focus? On the other hand, in Telangana, my own sense is the Congress is doing better in Telangana than in Karnataka. They have because the victory was more recent than the victory here. So I think the chances in Telangana are a bit more, and the chances for the BJP to improve their 5 out of 13 is also a bit more in Telangana. Other 3 states, I would differ a bit with Chandan here. When the Prime Minister said in a recent interview that I'm not looking at 2029, I'm looking at 2047, I thought he was talking about Tamil Nadu. That this is a long-term plan, not an immediate plan. 2024 is a T20 match. But the BJP is looking at a test series, not a test match. It is looking at a test series. What they are hoping to do in this election is become the principal competitor to the DMK. Lead an alliance which will be the opposing alliance to the DMK and push the Anna DMK to the background. And then create a narrative which they've already started, a narrative which is a challenge to the DMK narrative. Remember, the DMK, Anna DMK narrative is no different except on personality. They would want to build a different narrative which would take some time to actually seep into the ground to be able to result in electoral victories. I would not be surprised if there are 1 or 2 victories in Tamil Nadu. Those who support the BJP are always, I can make out whether somebody supports or opposes the BJP in a conversation. Because when I say 1 or 2, is there an exclamation mark or a question mark? I come to know which side of the divide they are on. Kerala, difficult to break through the LDF-UDF stranglehold. They are trying for a toehold, not a foothold, a toehold in Kerala. There seem to be 1 or 2 seats where that may be possible. There again, their aim is to weaken the UDF and take the challenge directly with the LDF later. This is the BJP strategy across the country. Fight with the number 2 party, bring the number 2 party to your side and then fight with the biggest party.
They take over the opposition spaces.
Right. And finally, on Andhra, they are riding piggyback with the TDP this time. Remember 2014, it was the same Chandrababu Naidu who said, Namo actually means Naidu Modi and not Narendra Modi. And I'm surprised the leader survived by saying that. And now he's part of the alliance. Again, here the aim of the BJP is simple. Use the opportunity to get 2-3 seats, which they have done in the past with the TDP, and then look at the fight that happens between the TDP and the YSR Congress and then take that position. So 2 clearly different strategies across South India.
Can I ask a question? So when you spoke about the Congress narrative in Tamil Nadu, the BJP narrative in Tamil Nadu, I was very interested because I was recently there, and what I noticed was a very different approach in the kinds of electoral ads that were being put out. Now, the DMK was saying, okay, we inaugurated this factory, this provided so many jobs, XXX. But the BJP was putting out a far more family-oriented kind of narrative. It was saying, thank Modi for doing grandchildren, thank Modi for doing this so your grandparents can have a healthier life. And to me, that was such a huge kind of difference in narrative. Is that the kind of difference in narrative that you're talking about?
Let's assume that any party has multiple eggs in their baskets. We are in the days of a package deal. So the BJP package has several elements. It has this element of appeal to the family, which they are pushing thanks to Lalu much forward now. Because now you see all the ads on our family, which is coming up, and what you said is part of that process. Because remember, in Tamil Nadu, Modi is a much bigger figure than the BJP. If you look at vote share for BJP and support for Modi is bigger than the support for the BJP. So they would like to use that. But I think also, let's remember, there is a bigger narrative. Is the point that Udayanidhi Stalin made about Sanatana Dharma being made for the first time in India, in Tamil Nadu? Chandan, haven't we heard this for the last 40 years being said by them? But now you use that statement from a different perspective because a new narrative is being created. Anna DMK wouldn't do that because they had a common way of looking at some of these issues. That's the point I'm making of a new narrative being created.
And the Sanatani Dharma comment was used maximally in the Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan elections.
Yeah.
And it didn't, it's an all India thing. It's no longer a local event. And everyone has to be mindful of their alliance and what their expectations are. And it's not as free as things used to be.
Exactly.
That's in a charged atmosphere, that's especially.
There's nothing local. This could become an international thing, depending on who is saying what. That's the way things are being used out of context in ways that can make sense in a new context.
Yeah, Mr. Murthy, Mr. Shastri and Gowda were mentioning about guarantee schemes. In Karnataka, Congress is banking on guarantees to see them through, that whatever the target of 18, 20 or 25 seats. Do you think it will work for Congress in these elections? Because people are voting to elect a national government. They've already voted Congress to power and guarantees are being implemented. How do you look at it, Congress's narrative or Congress dependence on guarantee schemes to see them through these elections?
I think Karnataka has been a game changer from the beginning, for the last about 20, 30 years, I would say, in certain areas of governance. I think this was the first state since independence who went with the full blast with a universal basic income model. In terms of, there is always poverty, there is 10%, 20, 30% poverty, depending on the state where you are. I think this was the first attempt ever done by a state of the country with reasonably good resources, not bankrupt, reasonably good resources, to offer a universal basic income targeted at women in that case. And another program like the Shakti program, I don't know how many of you know, this is the world's biggest women-empowered mobility program ever created. I read about in the BBC that an Austrian town with 3,000 people made transport free for people. Here there is about 30 million women who has an option of going out, their mobility entirely free, no limitation on that. I think this is a real benefit that I get every day. Success is about habits. You remind a lady going to a garment worker going to the garment every day, getting onto your bus, you're reminding her every day that this is a benefit which the government has given to that. Any other benefit, let's say a gas cylinder is a bi-monthly or a once in a month benefit that a lady would remember when she's doing it, when she's changing it. But a Shakti program kind of thing is a real game changer on the ground. But then that universal basic income, giving that little relief of 5,000 rupees for a lower strata of the society family, I think targeted totally at women, I think is a very, very big game changer. And I primarily think in the context of an emotive India today, I always say India is a continent pretending like a country or behaving like a country. I think women are the new category today. We used to have elections which used to run on farmer as a category, farmer as a narrative, and labor as a narrative, and BJP brought in the Hindutva or religion as a narrative. I think Karnataka's core narrative today is women, far more trustworthy, far more dependable. I think they are also emotional animals. They get the benefit, they respond to that. I think this time the Lok Sabha elections for the Congress is fundamentally banking on the benefits that have been given. If it is a promise, that's one part. I think about 90% of the promises, I think the recipients have already got it. So any more promise coming in from the manifesto of the India, I think they are going to believe. And women particularly are the biggest dependable voters for the Congress bloc today.
Quickly, let me ask Samita, India has the largest youth population in the world. Are they getting adequate and accurate information to make an informed choice, or are narratives driving their decisions?
So I can only speak about the people that I come across, and I travel a lot, and I work with people in different stratas of society. But I've actually been really impressed by the kind of knowledge that's come out from the youth in India today, even from very, and I cannot speak of this being a generalization, but this is the people that I come across with, extremely smart, extremely sharp, far sharper than their parents often. And very willing, it's a bit of a challenge for them in their home to challenge the kind of narratives that their parents are putting out, but they're definitely thinking about these things. They're also incredibly exposed. COVID, what has happened to them during the pandemic has made them hugely aware of mental health issues. So there's a level of emotional sensitivity there that I don't think previous generations have seen. There's a level of awareness about things like addiction. even amongst young men in slums who I've met, they seem to know and they seem to understand how these patterns even of behavior develop into addiction. So from that I'm inferring that these young people who are not going to vote in this election necessarily, but will be voters down the line, they are far more aware, they're far more emotionally intelligent. I just met a young librarian who's about 19 years old, and she is in a village in Bihar. She's a village librarian there. She was reading a book to the kids in this library, and it was a book called Gutli Has Wings, which is about a boy who wants to be a girl. In my mind, in my imagination, I would have never imagined a 19-year-old woman in a village in Bihar taking the risk to read a book about a boy who wants to be a girl in that context. So I think the young people of India sometimes amaze me and startle me.
And now, are the fundamentals of the nation changing due to the ongoing nature of ideology-based politics? Again to you. These are like rapid fire questions.
This, I think the other three panelists are far more equipped to respond to. But yes, I do. I see much more agitation actually building up. I see more kind of binaries happening. I was recently in Rajasthan at the time of the inauguration of the Ayodhya temple, and the kind of fervor that one saw on the streets, that I saw in front of me in my eyes, was insane. But then, for example, at the same time, I'm meeting so many young people who are very openly talking about issues like education, sex education, addiction. So it seems to me that in the next 5 years, it's going to be more of a conflict, not just about ideology, but between ideology and freedom of choice. That's what I see, a battle coming along generational lines.
I fully agree with what is said. I'm seeing in the younger generation much more participation in non-party politics. You see, the movement politics, the protest politics, that politics, their participation is much more. And Bansi, to expand on your point, 65% of India is less than 35 years of age. 65% of India is less, that 1/3 of India is less than 35 years of age. And if you look at the 18 to 35 age group, if my memory serves me right, they constitute around 1/4 of the voting population of this country today. And that's why parties are today understanding the importance of appealing to that segment as being important. But then at this conclave, I'd like to raise a small question. Can this conclave be one of the contributors to make sure that urban India votes?
Yes.
Delhi South, Mumbai South, Bangalore South are the constituencies in their states with the distinction of the lowest voter turnout in continuous elections. Now, if these youth which were being referred to, especially in urban areas, have to be plugged into the politics of this country, exercising their power of voting. Now, this is something I hope the Indian Express, New Indian Express can start as a movement in this election of getting urban India out to vote. We have started this in universities, a campaign in every university, 23 days more for voting, 22 days more for voting, and a statement coming out every day. But I think that is what is needed. If this younger generation is to be really brought into the process effectively and they are convinced about the need to vote, they will look at the older people and say, who are you to tell us when you yourself don't do it? Urban India coming out and voting, I think, is critical for this country.
Just to follow up on what he said, you said two things that are, I think, to be read with each other. One is you see a greater number of youth interested in non-party politics. And the same youth, I suppose, are not interested in party politics. But what does it mean then? Does it mean that they feel the political sphere is totally compromised, everyone is the same, let me not take an interest in what's happening, let me take an interest in things where things can actually mean something? Is that the reading that you're offering? Because one of the things that the BJP has done successfully, I think, is looking at the number of people coming over, switching over across party lines. And if you're a voter, being asked to vote on ideological lines, and there you see people swapping parties Without the least hesitation, how are the voters going to take ideology seriously? I mean, the person they vote. So there's a problem there. And the question you had about what are ideologies doing to minds? I mean, I think that's the question that is not age specific, because I really feel, and this is a global thing, the polarization across ideological lines, and those lines seeming very sharply drawn. And if you want to belong on this side, you have to say yes to a checklist of things, and the same on the other side. It's a very difficult time. But following up on what he said, I mean, and if you're a sociologist, you will know that the category youth can't be used in a self-evident manner, because there's the urban youth and the rural youth, and the poor youth and the middle class youth. I mean, the middle class youth, the youth doesn't end until you're 40 now. But if you're in the poorer classes, you get married at 18 and your youth has ended essentially, because when you're working, you're supporting a family. And then you're thinking differently. But that said, I think the idea that we have a young population who may emerge as a voting sort of constituency with its own preferences is yet to be seen. Because no party is making that pitch as of now. I think they have something to say, but they're not saying, except for unemployment or things like that, which are again large sorts of promises. There isn't any youth-targeted specific objectives being laid out.
I would concede Chandan's point and just add one rider to that, which is this. Yes, I think when it comes to voting and not voting, we have seen this clear pattern in India, unlike the West. The poorer you are, the less educated you are, the lower the social category you belong to, the more likely you are to vote. And this holds good for the youth also. The youth behave very much like the older generations on the question of voting. So I think the point which Chandan made, the sense of alienation that a segment of society, including the youth, feel or face vis-a-vis the political parties, yes, at the party level they need to be able to deal with it. I'm talking of a parallel track where, as a concerned citizenry, that question also is raised about young people. Yes, and not just young people, those who don't vote, including young people, that yes, there are challenges in the polity, but the solution is not moving away from electoral politics.
Yes.
My friend put it very well once. Unfortunately, the approach is, I love democracy, I hate politics. Now, that's not possible. If you love democracy, you have to participate in politics and whatever status it is in. And at the end of the day, politics is a mirror of society to us. The various shades of society are reflected in the politics that you see in a country happening.
Serious.
Ideologically, whenever I used to address students long back, time was classified into AD and BC, before Christ and after that. In my late 90s and early 2000s, in my little addressing, I used to say, I belong to AG and the BG group, not the AD and the BC. It's before Google and after Google. And later on, I went on to change, saying that, it's before Meta and after Meta, because speed of change has been the fastest in the human history in the last 20 years. Now I say we are in the age of post-truth. So I think whatever ideology that mankind believed in the last about 100 or 150, the more of last is a century and a half, they're all being rewritten today unknowingly. We are kind of now slaves to new thought processes which necessarily doesn't connect to any of those things. I think the whole new playing field is being set up, primarily because we have the power of the social media. What was unthinkable today is achievable within a matter of months. A whole new religion may come up which could be bigger than any of the whole new thought process may come up, which is actually is what we are currently undergoing. We are in these great times that the greatest change in the history of the mankind, we are actually there to experience it. On the democratic side, I fundamentally believe, and I second doctor's point of view, professor's point of view, it is the poor of this country who have saved the democracy in this country. I'll give you a simple example. In Bangalore city, Mahadevpura votes 50%, adjoining Hoskote votes 90%. The difference is 2 kilometers. See the change of mindset. Mahadevpura is full of, Mahadevpura or your KR Pura is urban, IT, regular, upper middle class, they vote 50%. You cross 2 metro stations. Here is a constituency which votes 90%. That necessarily means every votable person in the constituency on that particular day has voted. This is the beauty of this country, and I fundamentally believe it's the poor who are going to save democracy, not the big educated ones or the rich billionaires.
That's a very interesting observation. So, Hoskote, we noticed.
Exactly, it's right in our neighborhood. It's right in our neighborhood.
Yeah, Professor Shastri's suggestion of the New Indian Express, we have been doing it. So in the last previous elections also, we took up several initiatives to create awareness among voters. ECI is doing a phenomenal job. In fact, the Election Commission of India is creating awareness. But why is it so? Why is it apathy? We spoke about voters' apathy in urban India, not going out and voting, whereas poor saving the democracy. Why is it so?
I think if I may start with that. Yeah. I think last 10 years, the biggest influence on our lives have been change of behaviors. The behavioral change that what we have undergone in the last 10 years is unthinkable. I mean, I order food from a restaurant which is 10 steps away and then somebody delivers it that way. I think this fundamental shift in human behavior, which has never happened in the last maybe a century or a millennia, has just happened. Now believe me, if Friday is a voting day, half of our outer ring road, IT, Whitefield people are going to start their cars at 6 o'clock in the morning, go on a vacation for 3 days. And previous evening he would be discussing about the democracy, fascism, right, need to save, everybody should vote. Friday at 7 o'clock he lives with the family. I think he's the culprit. I think we play on both the sides, we're just comfortable with what we speak. We don't show that in action. Democracy necessarily means you leave all that work for an hour, go and vote. I think that is something which from a school level I think we have missed out in driving that point to the kid, telling him that you belong to a constitution where you have rights. It is your duty to go. If the dad is not voting, I want the kid to remind him, saying that dad, you need to first vote before you go and do anything else on the voting day.
Ram, there was just a small point on that. 2014, those of us who voted would remember, voting day in Bengaluru was between holidays.
Yes.
There was a series of holidays and the voting day came.
Exactly.
So we did a survey at that time. My students went to the airport, went to the railway station and went to the bus stand on the last working day. What did we find? Families reaching the airport to leave Bangalore on a holiday. And when they were interviewed and asked, what about voting? Voting? But we have booked a family holiday, so voting is okay. Railway station, in the unreserved compartments which were full, when people were asked, where are you going? They said, my vote is in my village.
I'm going.
So I'm going back to my village now to vote. That, I mean, what Murthy made the point about. Now, why does this happen? Why is this disconnect? I think the upper middle class and the more well-to-do have a very interesting economic theory of what is my benefit in voting. And do I need my elected representative to solve my problem? I have enough influence, power and resources to solve it when it comes. A poor voter has no choice but to go to the representative to resolve that problem. So here lies the difference, and the need for the educated voter to understand that unless he actually goes out and exercises that vote, the change that they are talking about would actually not happen. And the good thing in the last election was in many urban areas across the country, women voting was higher than men voting. So there, maybe that's the driver for change now as you go forward.
And just to add to that, rural India, on the voting day, if there are marriages, the bride and the groom comes with a dress and vote. You show me one that happens in urban India.
Absolutely, that's a good one.
I mean, that's a commitment, right?
No, but if you're serious about drawing inferences from observations like this, the jump can't be that the poor are invested in India's democracy. That can't be the logical inference. They're interested in voting, they care deeply about voting, but why do they care is a question that remains to be answered. And I think part of it is you want a stake in being able to approach someone for helping, etc. But I think it's something else. The connection to the place, maybe the kin networks, maybe money, maybe a sense of belonging. All of these things, community, etc., are working very deeply. And the thing about why do you want the status quo to change if things are comfortable? The reason why the middle class doesn't vote, for me, there is no difference, as tangible difference in their lives, whoever gets elected. It continues. They will vote another party only if they can see a potential change in how they've been used to living. As of now, if you're living in a nice apartment, regardless of who gets elected, your life will not be interrupted. You're already riding on existing privileges, which are, in fairness, being maintained by whoever comes to power. The MLA cares more about the middle class, who never votes for him or her, than he does for the poor, because he's interested in how the media will represent what's happening, etc. These are ironies, I think.
But the sad thing is, in so many of these elite colleges,
yes,
so many of the students, we have a large chunk of them. I won't ask for a show of hands.
Yes.
But so many of them have not registered. They are 18, eligible to vote. It's so sad that in the elite colleges, they haven't registered. But the Election Commission of India, when they go to Bengaluru City University or the GAS College, that is Government Arts and Science College, all of them are registered, 100%. It's so sad.
Based on what's been saying, how do the patterns of voting work for migrant labor? Because I'm also seeing in the outskirts of Bangalore, like a lot of construction labor is coming from places like Bengal and so on and so forth. How are the patterns of voting? How is the patterns of actually being invested in democracy amongst those kinds of populations? Do you?
Should I take it?
You should.
What we have found is candidates have sent their representatives to Bangalore to meet these people, get them their tickets, take them back home, ensure that they vote and come back. I'm not saying everybody goes, but a large segment of this migrant voter is courted by their parties in the place where they have their vote. And they do go back and exercise the vote there. And as Chandan said, for the less economically privileged sections of our society, one way of identifying themselves with the system is by exercising your right as a voter. And that identity, I think, becomes extremely important. And a very critical reason for me, not only you know who is the one who you can approach to solve your problem, it also gives you that sense of identity.
What was the question?
Samita's
question. No, I think this is the answer. But I think there are other answers about which party is more active with working with the migrant laborers. I mean, there are answers. The BJP has been consistently known to show more interest in people who have migrated, who live in new settlements, etc. I mean, I don't know the answers to why. The other parties don't care as much. But
There's just one point I want to add to what Professor Shastri said. See, there is this very sad practice that you have these people who take a religious deity, a picture of the deity, and get the family to promise on the deity, saying, I will vote for you. And sometimes it's followed by a monetary transaction. And it could be the fear of the promise, or the, you feel obligated. After the monetary transaction, you end up going and voting. I mean, that's a sad thing which, Professor Shastri...
I personally would not accept both the points. I have seen people who said, God will forgive me if I do not do what I was asked to do by the people who are around me. And I think data is showing that families do not necessarily vote in the same pattern. Data is happily showing that the woman of the house does not vote according to the way the man of the house votes.
No, Professor...
On the second point, we have found that people do take money when it is offered. Why should they not? They say, you have been corrupt, I am getting part of what you got. But that does not define the way they vote.
It should not.
Does not, is what I am saying. Data shows that people have been quite independent in terms of deciding who they would like to vote for. And that credit I would give to the Indian voter who ultimately makes that decision based upon how he or she perceives what is good for them at a given point of time. And I don't think that monetary benefit is in the front of their mind when they are standing before the EVM.
Would you agree, Dr. Gowda?
I have not done studies, but I think it's a bit more complex. Now political parties know, right, that someone is taking money from all three parties. Now, how do you make sure that they end up voting you and not the others? One method is this, getting them to swear on a family deity that they will surely vote for them. There are all these things. There's the other tactic. You pay them money and you keep their voting IDs with you, not let them vote. This happens, especially in minority areas.
The indelible ink before the election date.
And we also need to know more about when a booth being funded heavily by party A hasn't voted party A. What happens afterwards in terms of the people who have distributed money? How do they go about dealing with them, etc. So these are.
Right.
I think post-election results, you should hear the stories
Yes.
of the defeated candidates.
Yes.
This is where he's going to come up with plenty of things, saying that, this entire
Yes.
small social group promised that they would vote me.
Yes.
This particular location promised to vote for me. I think in terms of voting, final voting decisions, Indian average voter is relatively smarter, right? He engages, if a party A comes and talks to him, he engages in the same way with party B or C. If there is some favor shown to him, I think he takes from all of them, which I personally think you should not say no to that. And finally, he makes his own call. If all the three parties give him some kind of allowance or some money to go by, he's not going to vote for three parties. Finally, he's going to vote what's based on what's on his mind. So now it has become more a routine saying that any party that you need to at least go and do something to him, because that's one way to engage, because in a parliamentary democracy, you can't go and virtually meet every voter in the 5 years, know him. This is one way of just an engagement. It's just telling that, hi, how are you? Here is who I am. I mean, candidates always post-election defeats, all these things come out, saying that, we promised, they didn't vote, they promised, they didn't vote. This is a regular story. I think the story will continue for some more time.
But even if it will continue for some more time, we should raise an objection to voter corruption. I mean, this is just cannot pass.
It is.
It's so damn serious. The amounts of election expenditure go spiraling upwards. There's more to do with this.
60 crore.
So, also, the part to that is, we hear about political party A paying 100 crores for an MLA to cross over. Now, if my MLA crosses party and I'm a poor voter, and now I know that this gentleman whom I voted last time, thinking that he's good, now has 100 crore with him, and he's coming back again and asking votes in a different party and a different ideology name. Am I a fool to say that, tell him that, boss, you're okay, you have changed your shirt, change your dress, and I want to go to vote again? No, I think social media and other things have made sure that you go to any rural voter, he will know what his MLA's actual worth is today. Actual worth.
I'd just like to take an example from Madhya Pradesh and Karnataka on this. Both these states saw in the last 5 years a large number of MLAs resigning, shifting party, and winning. So does it mean that the voter accepts this party shift? Studies have shown no. In Karnataka, when 12 MLAs resigned, 9 contested, 8 won.
2019.
The voter was saying, let me give a stable majority to one party. It's not about the person who has moved from X party to Y party. Y party is in need of X number of seats to get a majority, give it to them. We will not have an election for another 4 years. We will have a stable government. Of course, that is a different issue whether that expectation of the voter was met. Something similar in Madhya Pradesh. When Jyotiraditya's supporters and he resigned and moved away and you had an election, exactly same. That let's give one party a clear majority, this is a by-election, let's not wait and have another election. So I think the factors that motivate a voter to take a particular stand, I would be a little cautious in saying it is saying yes to corruption or it's saying yes to moving from one side of the fence to the other. The voter is looking at other issues when they are deciding what to vote for, who to vote for. And here it was clearly, let's give this party the next 4 years in power and let's not have another government, let's not have another election at this stage.
That's voter maturity.
Yeah, that's very nice to know and encouraging to know. So, but it's a fact that elections are a very expensive affair. Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman recently said she opted out of contesting Lok Sabha elections because she lacks enough funds for campaigning, sufficient funds for campaigning. And how do you look at money power in elections? Samita, does it deter youngsters from taking active part in democratic process?
The money
power, I am saying,
The role of
it has
money.
become, elections are becoming family kind of affairs when you look at ticket distribution or, the kind of money spent.
I think, again, I'm not sure how that is, but I've been thinking about something that, and that maybe that relates to your question as well, because what I see among Gen Z and the younger generation, and maybe not all of them can vote right now, is this huge, of course, we're all living in times when our jobs are constantly changing, and that is more true of the younger generation than it is for the older generation. More importantly, they're also very climate sensitive. So I'm also wondering if those sorts of, I don't see any party really having a very clear or thought out approach to particularly climate change, and yet the younger generation is so deeply aware of how that is going to impact them. And I'm also very curious to know from you if you see that being something that might play out, maybe if not in this election, but in future discussions. Because even with the migrant labor, so much of that is changing because of climate change. Can they even go back to their villages and vote in certain situations? So I'm also curious to, even if you look at the water problem in Bangalore, it is a product of this. So for me, that lack of resources is becoming really something that younger generation are more worried about than.
There's a fantastic point that Savita raised, the climate change, that the real issue which is here now.
A few years back, we did the first Karnataka youth survey. We interviewed youths in Karnataka to find out what their aspirations, expectations were. This was a precursor to the creation of the state youth policy. Now, as Chandan very rightly put it, there is no one youth in Karnataka or India. I think there are youth differ in their vision, their perspective, their expectation, depending upon where they are and what is their life experience. And what we found in that study, which came in the youth report and the youth policy, was very interesting. That the youth who are at the cusp of change are not our metropolitan youth, are not our youth in the village, but the youth in the small towns of Karnataka. These were the youth who were the truly aspirational youth, because they knew what is going on in a city, they had the experience of the village also, and therefore this was the youth, when we asked, what do you expect? The real issues which were practical came up from this segment of society. The young people living in small towns of this country. And around that time also, if you look at changes that happened elsewhere, sports arena. We had earlier a cricket team which was largely from urban pockets. And then you had the change where most of those who are today our IPL cricket heroes are all from small towns. Now, that I think is something that policy makers and politicians need to carefully look at. That here are the next generation in this country who will be taking important positions, professional positions, workplace positions. Because I read a report which said by 2040, 27% of the employable population in the world will be from India. 27%. So are parties and policies looking at skilling them to what they would be able to benefit from at that point of time, especially this aspirational youth living in small towns and small cities?
Just to add or build on what he said, the politicians not thinking enough properly. I'm one of those few people who still thinks that the rural India, which still has a huge chunk of India's population, which economists are constantly saying has a surplus population, we need to shift them out to cities, and then deal with the unemployment problem. See, they're already there. How do you think of rejuvenating villages? Not just agriculture, but other occupations, livelihoods that can be revived, introduced, etc., that actually allows them to stay on and lead meaningful lives there. Even with the aspirations that they may have, if you, the COVID times were revealing the number of people who said, we should just go back because our lives are more valued there, we'll at least get a decent burial. It's not like, we're just being cast off here, etc. It's very deep. And we can't be led by images of the West, where the migration to cities was almost total. But the 19th century, England is almost wholly urban. And it's not going to be that here. It should not be thought that way. But all our economists are constantly talking about how India will be urban in 25 years, how do we plan for an urban-ready future, etc., etc. Disastrous. Because the idea of somehow rebuilding rural India, not as a con job, but as a serious effort at giving people a chance to continue to live where they are and build lives for themselves that are sustainable and meaningful, is something that is not on the agenda. But I think it builds on what he was saying, planning for youth in small towns. You should also plan for youth in cities and not force them to quit and become a plumber here or live in a slum. No dignity in those lives.
This is an area of my personal interest in profession, human resources. Just to inform, Indians are the most mobile, talented people in the world today. 3 crore people live out of the country. No other country potentially has this resource or the opportunity to actually put 3 crore people across the world and say, go and work. The biggest gift is also the people. There is also the negative side is also that we have too many people that way. I still keep wondering why any of our governments, irrespective of party A, party B, has not come up with a policy and make it a formal thing saying that any of you countries, anywhere in the world, please come and hire. We'll facilitate that. We can give you job. We can give jobs in India to only X percentage of people, not everybody. That way. How did the Middle East happen? We have countries where there are more Indians than the natives, right? In UAE, the natives are 7 lakh people, the Indians are 40 lakh people. Out of 80 lakh population, 50% are Indians. And they follow rules. Beautifully, they follow rules when they're out of the country. US, the most progressive and the most professional group are the Indians. We overtook Chinese about 5 years back. And then now Japan. So I think a policy is need of the hour where potentially we create those ecosystems where the whole world can come and actually look at Indian talent. For whatever has happened till now has happened with little policy support. Yes. For that matter, IT also, only the IT actually had some policy support. Rest of the things, you have about 80 lakh people in the Middle East. That didn't happen with policy. It happened with privilege. The Saudi king, Indira Gandhi requested Saudi King Saud saying that, we have a lot of poor people. And Saudi has started rebuilding. Can we send our people? That was in the early 70s. That was a key trigger for Indians to go to the Middle East. And see the story now. Almost we buy $80 billion worth of oil from the Middle East. These people actually send $80 billion in the currency of their earnings to the India. I think we're just swapping the oil money that we pay them with the Indians, remittances of the Indians. I think that's a beautiful story which could be potentially replicated in tens of locations because Europe is aging. China is aging for that matter. Forget Europe. China is aging. North America is aging. All good economies are aging and they have no way that they can reverse it. So I think it requires a policy level thought process. I think thinkers have to put their mind into that and see. Potentiality wise, I think we can send another 30 million, 40 million people. We have plenty of them. We keep producing more. We can always produce more and send them. But I think the great opportunity wise, the emerging sector as a tech, we are the only nation in the world where the globe can look at in terms of scalable talent. You want 10,000 people in a particular skill set today, India is the only location. You want 50,000 people on a particular skill set, India is the only nation where you can go to. There is no second nation that you can go to today. I think that's the advantage that we are sitting on today. I think somebody needs to put their minds together, make it into a policy, make it easy, and then make it work. I think you could potentially end up giving another 2 crore jobs, which we've been talking about in the last about 10 years, my take.
Yeah, just we have a couple of more questions and then we'll take the questions from the audience. On the center-state relations, sir, in the southern states, Karnataka recently approached Supreme Court seeking directions for releasing drought relief funds. Kerala went to Supreme Court on the issue of tax devolution, and we know what's happening in Tamil Nadu between Raj Bhavan and the government. How does it, board in the larger perspective of federal structure? Is federalism under stress? Or we'll start with you, Professor Chandri.
Chandan should, because he holds the Ramakrishna Hegde chair.
We'll start.
You're the man.
Yeah.
No, I think ideally this should not be the subject of politicking, right? That there are rules in place. If there's a drought relief thing there, that should come automatically. And it should be beyond party and, interventions. But it's become that. So how do we get back a certain kind of rule of law, if you want to use that phrase, is a challenge. But I think it's unfortunate that Amit Shah's denial that you have requested funds and then there's proof that we did it 4 months ago. This sort of a thing is really not befitting a mature democracy. You use the word mature. I mean, it's like child's games. I mean, you can't. 4,000 crores is a serious amount of money. And you can't say you didn't request it and then we have proof of having sent in the request, etc., etc. I mean, it's just one example. But the complaint that of unfairness in allocation of tax resources after the GST regime has come into place are serious. Anyone should want to care. I don't think it's about supporters of one party caring and the support of another party not. This is a non-partisan matter. If you care for the country's governance and how it's done, these are fundamentals. These are really fundamentals, which cannot become subject to the whims of the center and who they're dealing with, etc.
While fully supporting Chandan, I'd make 3 points on this. First, when the recent debate broke out between the Chief Minister and the Finance Minister at the union level on this, I personally thought both were right in what they were saying. The Chief Minister was right in saying that being a state which contributes so much to the national revenues, we are not getting back our due share. The Union Finance Minister, she was right when she said, we don't control that. It is not our decision. What she meant is, the previous Finance Commission, the methodology that they adopted for the distribution of revenues was wrong. And generally, the Finance Commission recommendations are in principle accepted by the government without a debate, and that happened. And therefore, Nirmala Sitaram was right in saying, this was not under our control. And the Chief Minister was right in saying that we didn't get what is due to us. So I think now the pressure needs to be built up on the new Finance Commission to have a right methodology for this distribution to happen. Secondly, I have found that complaining on this issue does not have too much of electoral salience. For the voter, we voted you to power, you sort it out. And this is not an issue on which I am going to vote in an election. Third and last, in some ways what the South is talking about is not so much not getting what is our right, but who dominates over the politics of this country. I think it's more a symptom of that development. And I think there is something bigger waiting for us 2 years from now, when the next census happens and post that census delimitation happens. Because if you go by the current numbers, South India would lose 30 seats, and all those seats would go to the north. Now, I think these are for me, that is the bigger issue that is brewing, and which is likely to ignite greater passions in the South when it comes to a question of representation.
I think it's more an approach like punish the performer, right? Punish the performer. You're performing, I'm going to punish you. right?
For example?
This is an afterthought. The population.
Yeah, it's an afterthought. One is population part of it. Second is, okay, South manages finances reasonably better in that sense. We contribute a lot, which is fine. It goes to every part of it. But what is the drought funds, what is discretionary today is more a strategic approach they take. It should basically be a right of the state to get the funds, whether it is floods or any other natural calamities. Now it's at the mercy of the government saying that, I don't like you, that I'm not going to give you. You're not my party, of course you don't get it. Then I'll make all kinds of excuses to say that, to deny you that whatever that right. It should have been a right more than a privilege.
Congress has said it applies to rice.
It applies to rice.
Congress has said it applies to what? Devolution of funds, 5,000.
These were never discussed. Devolution were not the subjects which ever came out among the public. But then today it is a public thing because Union does it brazenly. Union says, I'm going to do whatever that I want to do. You go and do that.
And Congress has said, Upper Bhadra, they promised 5,400 crore, but we got not a single rupee. So Congress has been complaining about it.
Can say 3 points on this.
Yeah.
Number one, I think we should have a authority which has representatives of both the center and the state sitting to make these decisions. That's the first point. Second, transparency. Third, accountability.
Absolutely.
What Raghavanji said, there is no transparency in the process. Why does Chandan get something and why don't I get it?
Absolutely.
Now that Chandan gets much more than me, that's a different issue.
That's what you think.
What I'm saying is when one state gets and another does not, that's where the challenge comes.
And the same state doesn't get when the government changes.
And that's accountability.
Yeah.
So I think for me, these are the 3 stepstones that we have to tread on to be able to solve this particular problem.
Okay. Quickly, let me ask you, what role will women and youth play in this upcoming election? I'll ask all of you the same question, but we start with you.
I am more interested in seeing the role that they will play post this election because, for example, I was talking to a researcher from from the Indian Institute of Human Settlements who gave me this very worrying data that gestational periods, the amount of time that it takes for a woman to produce a baby is actually shortening because of the rising temperature. So more women, and these are particularly true of poorer backgrounds. Imagine a woman who already has a couple of children, who has no access to water really right now, and is working in searing temperatures. She's going to go into labor and deliver a premature baby. At 7.5 weeks is what, as a result, I think the cutoff temperature is around 38 degrees. So these kinds of things, I think, are going to just accumulate. And I think what we're also talking about is systemic change. These small things which we think are very small are going to add up and grow. So in this particular election, yes, I think women are voting certainly, and I think as Mr. Murthy pointed out, that there is a loyalty to the government that's happening, but I'm interested to see whether that will actually play out in future elections. I'm not sure unless this kind of sensitivity is shown. I think we might be saying, okay, women can, we're going to give them these SOPs, we're going to give them income, but I think a lot more has to be done to ensure that vote happens over time as well. So that's my take on that.
Shastri?
2 data points. One,
No, let me ask you this way. It's so sad that so many years after independence, women need reservation to come into public space. I mean, it's their right. It's so sad that they say, give us the reservation, big deal.
now, while I concede very categorically that it's their right, but in this male-dominated society, that right does not get exercised. We are not talking of equality in law, we are talking of equality in result. What do we actually see on the ground? And what we actually see in the ground requires that initial push to be given. But now coming to the main argument. Let's remember that in the last 2 decades, the percentage of women voting has actually increased quite significantly. And in some states of India, more women vote than men. So firstly, the woman vote is becoming important. And number 2, studies are also showing that when women cast their vote, they are looking at issues of their family. They are looking at the bread and butter issues which matter to them much more than men. So I hope political parties are keeping that in mind, because everybody is looking at the woman vote. And today the woman vote will not just go for the promises you make. We have again found women look at not the promise made, but the delivery of that promise on the ground. Parties which have made promises but not delivered have not got the vote.
For
Men
example,
or women, much more among.
For example?
Sorry?
For example, which party has not got the vote after?
Of course. I'll take the example of Rajasthan, where last time the party made all promises to come back to power, and people said, you had 5 years, nothing happened. And therefore, we are going to take a particular stand in the election.
Okay. Yeah, Professor Gaur.
No, I don't think my answer is going to be essentially different than what he said. So if you have a different question, that would be great.
Okay, so women and children,
But
women and youth.
Just to have an
Yeah.
anecdotal example to prove what he's saying. Just this afternoon,
Yeah.
an old maid showed up at her house before I was leaving and asked her, elections have come. What? I got 2,000 the first month. It hasn't come since then. So what was she saying? I can't, you can't expect me to vote Congress because the money hasn't come. And she didn't know what to do. She's gone to Bangalore 5 times. There's no one to give her a response, etc., etc. So there is, at that level of implementation, we don't know what's happened. So anyway, so yeah.
Okay.
No, but you had a different question.
No, so that is the same question. Role women and youth play in this election.
I think it's a silver bullet. None of the parties have been able to bite. It has happened at the panchayat levels. I think about 1/3 of the seats, in some cases 50. It has started with local bodies, but I personally think Assembly and Lok Sabha is where
The action is.
that you don't go for 25%, don't go for 33%. I personally think it should go for 50% at one go. There is no graduation in this that we start you with 25, 20, 30. Sorry. I think any party which can bite this bullet, I think will benefit, but there is a hesitation among all the parties that way. Same scenario. That go for it straight, go for 50% that way. And I think that's the end. Any society led or contributed greatly by women do much better than a society, in a patriarchal society. So women wise, I think reservation, again in this election, it is still not an issue. No manifesto says as of now that we're going to give reservation in Lok Sabha and Assembly.
No, it's been passed. So
It's
we'll
been
have
passed,
to wait
yeah.
for the next census to happen.
Next
After
census
that
to
it
happen.
comes.
So we still don't know whether it's still going to happen, because it's been now put in abeyance for about 75, 80 years. Might continue for some more time.
Okay, now the last question. We've all been reading about electoral bonds. So, your quick take on electoral bonds.
I believe that this is a classic case of, give me this and I'm going to do a favor. There is no two ways of looking at it. One way is annually you make a contribution, which used to be there earlier. Bigger corporates used to make a contribution. I think once in the last about 5 years, what we have seen in the electoral bond, just give me money and tell me what you want. This has been my only conclusion after looking at the data. People may argue in 100 other ways. I don't know. But I personally think you want to get a job done in this government, go buy an electoral bond, go put it in front of them saying that, boss, here is my job that needs to be done, and here is your bond. And it has perfectly worked. It is a beautifully fine-tuned, corrupt system which should not have been there at any cost. Supreme Court took far more time than they should have done it. But then now the cat is out of the bag. It's a straight case of, quid pro quo. You give me this, I'm going to do you a favor. I don't see any other way of looking at electoral bonds.
I think it's more than quid pro quo. The quid pro quos could have happened without the electoral bonds, given the way things are. But I think the levels of secrecy that were assured to the donor as well as to the party, outside of, they don't have to submit it as part of their audit stock statement, etc. I mean, what are we talking about? Why would you even think of a scheme of this kind? And if you remember, to pass that, they had to amend the Representation of People's Act. Or serious things were done before this was introduced. And you know from anecdotes how this was happened. You can actually sit across the table, and given the way the country is set up, you can't run a business without having a solid grey component. You can't. You'll have to have bought off people, you have paid off things. Making millions the clean way is just impossible the way things are. So I can actually line up the leading businessmen of any city, and I will have evidence against each one of their malpractices, and then say, if you won't, and this is more than quid pro quo. I think that they were, I actually knew someone who came smiling, saying I had the most expensive breakfast ever in my life, and he had actually paid 250 crores in a hotel in Bangalore in the last assembly elections. And this is, you can't do this, and I'm glad. I mean, it's extraordinary. Actually, they thought they could get away with it, and it's now out. But the more interesting thing for me is whether it will do the damage that everyone expected it to do. The revelation. I mean, it's seeming like just one other thing that has come out. And just look at the levels of, Sitaram Yechuri will say whatever, Rahul Gandhi will say whatever, but is it translating into deep resentment and anger? It isn't. It hasn't so far. I don't know.
Again, 3 points on that. First, I personally believe that there must be a way by which funding can happen to parties. However, if you are continuing with, if electoral bonds come in any way in future, there must be an independent regulator of the whole bond scheme. We must have clear rules for that.
Transparency.
We have seen last time that new companies were created just to give these donations. Should the company have a particular annual account statement which shows certain profits, and then from that you are giving part of your electoral bond? So I think there needs to be clarity on that. And of course, I think there needs to be an accountability of political parties where their accounts need to be publicly audited, and they need to show where the contributions from electoral bonds came and what they were used for. So I think these 3 elements are necessary: an independent regulator, greater transparency in terms of how the money came and where the money went and how the money was used, and rules for those who are eligible to make contributions under this.
So how do you look at all that has happened as far as electoral bonds are concerned?
As Chandan said, there is so much of disclosure that is now coming out, and there are clear indications of why bonds were bought and who bonds were given to, and maybe the media talks about it for 24 hours and then it's forgotten. So I don't think it really is having any impact at all. And my reason is different for that. This is a increasingly polarized society. So if I support X party, I will find a reason to justify why X party got the electoral bonds it got. I go back to my beginning point. People have a conclusion, they search for data to defend their conclusion.
Professor, my other question is, there has been very little knowledge about PM CARES fund. Who's given the money? How much has been given? Now let's say there is a change of government. I'm only assuming there is a change of government. Shouldn't the next Prime Minister know how much was paid, who paid? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
There is a total, so all right, electoral bonds is out in public space. The Supreme Court has said, all right, let's look into it, and some material has come out. PM CARES fund, not a shred of information is available. So my concern is there also.
Yeah.
I mean, how many things can you keep hidden in public space? This is public money.
I think people are not talking about it because they believe in a I care for myself fund also. I have to look after myself, and if I talk about a fund which is a problem, I will have a problem then at the end of the day.
I was speaking to a management consultant after the electoral bond issue. He defended it in the most creative way, saying that this is how the whole world works. Mr. Murthy, you should not worry. Whoever has the money will get a job done. That means this is the way the whole world works today. I honestly had no answers to him saying that, boss, this is a democracy. He said, forget, that's all for common people. This is how a corporate world works.
This is the subject of another discussion. Are Indians, do they really care for democracy? I mean, we seem to presume that everyone should love democracy, but what people say when they say democracy and what they care for, etc. I mean, these things are
a very, very spirited argument why electoral bonds are important, why they should be there, non-corruption, they indicate no corruption. Very spirited argument.
So one structural point one can make from this, the Indian middle class. If you, again, we talked about the West a while back, the middle class played an important role in how Western democracies evolved, right? When the transition was happening from monarchies and feudalism to democracy, the middle class took the lead in insisting on citizenship rights, etc. But the Indian middle class, I think, showed a certain seriousness in the first 2 decades after independence. But now, how is the Indian middle class thinking? Because at all said and done, it's an important part of the country in terms of,
We are missing one small point. As long as a thriving parallel economy continues in this country, you will not be able to solve the problem of unaccounted wealth finding its way into the electoral process. As long as the tap continues to give water, the system will leak. So unless you solve the black money problem in the country, you will continue to have that source of funding, and when that source is there, you will continue to use that source.
Yeah, ma'am would like to add.
Yeah, since we are discussing electoral bonds and it's the season is election, so the immediate question that follows is how much of the level playing field been skewed because of the electoral bonds? It has been scrapped, but it's not been scrapped in retrospect. So what is going to be the impact of it on the election? And do you feel that it will have, it has somehow worked its way into the election narrative somewhere in terms of impacting the mind of the voter?
Yeah. In terms of the level playing field, I think there is no level playing field today. I think here is one party A which has about 60-70% of the resources. Rest of India has another 60-70-30% of the resources. So practically there is no level playing field. I think that's over for now. At least over for the next 1 or 2 elections, because one party is sitting with the value of the money, which other party is simply impossible to connect or raise or do any of those things. One part. So this is the primary concern. When we have a system like this, one party can control almost every supply of money and also information and also law to control the others. I think I see a replay of 2013 and 14. 14 was a big change. UPA was accused of massive corruption. There were street protests, and then there was change. And the news, the timing of that was also closer to the election. We have a very similar situation now. The electoral bonds things have opened up now. I think in the next few weeks, it will play. I personally don't think it is not playing to the extent that it should play, but we don't know that. So the big change this country's voter has always brought in when it comes to corruption. And I fundamentally believe that some big change is going to happen again in this election because of these voter elections. Karnataka, the entire social architecture changed last year simply because the biggest driver of the Congress party's campaign was against corruption. 40%. About 40% corruption, their creative campaigns. It worked for them. And it worked for Mr. Modi in 2014. I personally think it is not going to work for Modi in 2010. To what extent? I don't know. We'll have to wait for the results.
But if I can say one quick thing, the United States that made funding transparent, and American politics has rationalized it. Right? I pay a senator this much money and get that person to do things for me. It's all legitimate, that pluralism. Now that has actually ensured that there's no level playing field. There are only 2 parties, and they are totally, at some level, committed to a certain capitalist order. And there's no alternative. There's Republicans, right-wing Christianity, etc. And then there's this thing also fairly conservative on any economic reform.
After a two-way conversation, I agree, but Mr. Gowda, I must add that we can't be kind of replicating the American system.
No. I was saying.
Whether lobbying has been legitimized, funding has been legitimized, the disconnect of the political system with the same voter apathy which we were discussing, and you people were, recounting anecdotes about it, and the rural-urban divide on that, rich-poor divide and voter apathy that we kind of discussed. Far more of that is visible in American politics.
Yes.
Okay,
No.
and it is
I think you misheard me, ma'am. No. I was not proposing the US as a model to emulate.
So that and if that is one part of it, the second part of it, recent studies are showing that the amount of money that is being spent in Indian elections are perhaps more than what is spent in US elections.
Yes.
We are the top most spending election spending country, and we are not even a middle income group, middle income country as yet. So I would like all of you to speak on this whole thing about what is the alternative, and what are we, how much of this money is this thing, or is this the first election where questions are being raised and a system of cleansing will happen any which way, if not during this election, but post this. The debate has already started. Do you think that is the case?
I'll quickly respond. I was saying making political funding transparent is not the solution to electoral bonds. In fact, the solution is how do you curb election expenditure? You have a ceiling, etc., which is a farce. No one is actually, it gets spent in the first 1 hour of your campaign. So I think we really need a discussion on how to, because unless election expenditure is curbed, the entry barriers will not go away to truly talented politicians who may want to contest as independents, etc. Right now, the question of youth contesting doesn't emerge unless you're part of a family setup, which is why then they complain, you're children of existing families. But then how do you participate otherwise?
I think Doctor would remember we earlier had discussions about state funding of elections, but somehow that just went for a toss. I don't know why. I think you can throw some light on that.
I think while state funding of elections is a very, very idealistic solution, the challenge is that how do you still prevent candidates from having access to funds? That's why I go back to my point about black money. Unless that access point is dealt with, whatever you do with regard to curbing expenditure, you see what Mr. Sheshan did was something great. He tried to control visible expenditure. Our walls became clean and all that happened. But did it really stop electoral malpractices? I don't think so. No. What could not be tapped, what could not be controlled, what could not be documented, actually increased much more subsequent to that. So I think we need to look at that larger picture which is there, and ma'am's point is extremely important. But I have another small point. As a sports enthusiast, I often ask myself the question, is there anywhere in the world a level playing field? Do you really have a level playing field anywhere? And does the level playing field example come up because the player wants to offset his or her inability to deal with the opponent?
Yeah, the lack of one shouldn't stop us from trying to explore options of creating one, but you're right. In the ideal, I think we would like, sports is an excellent example. The metaphor of level playing field comes from sports, where you're saying, everyone should have an even playing field. But I think the struggle should go on. I think so, to explore ways of making democracy sustainable.
Only unlevel playing field in this election has been the money on one side. White, black, grey, all the money is on one side. So little on the other side. The rest of the things, I think they are evenly matched. Whether it is
this community identity matters. In the US, a Jewish person can't become a president ever. Till now. All these things matter. Caste here also. Nina? Yeah.
I do have a question, but it's not this topic. It's not about electoral bonds. I basically have a question about the North-South divide. I remember the anti-Tamil, anti-Hindi agitations in the 60s, And there was a huge, I mean, that didn't just, it wasn't restricted just to the Tamils. It included the Malayalis, it included Telugus, it included everybody in the south. Now you're talking about a census, which the government is promising. Why would the south agree and vote for a census which reduces their numbers in parliament and reduces their voices? Anyway, we're a marginalized lot, even though the south is far more progressive and better off than the north. Our numbers will go down. Why should the south vote for a party that is going to cut our numbers down in parliament?
I think, Nina, it's for that reason that no party has categorically taken a stand on this issue. They are being ambivalent on this and saying, we'll cross the bridge when we come to it, because this can happen only after the next census operation and the delimitation commission being formed after that. So I think we are 7-8 years away from that happening. So no party today is willing to take a stand on this for the exact reason that you mentioned, that it could have a very, very explosive impact on the support base that they have if they were to take a stand on this issue. But I think in the next 2-3 years, this is going to become a critical issue for discussion. That are you going to make population as the sole basis for deciding how many seats every state will have? Now there is a very spacious argument coming up. No, we will increase the Lok Sabha seats to 770 and your seats will not go down. We say that's not the problem. I don't want the percentage of my seats to go down. I have 5% of those seats in Karnataka today. Tomorrow, if I get even 35 out of 770, it comes down to 3% or 3.5%. Now that should not happen. The proportion needs to be exactly the same. And therefore, some of us have been advocating that new delimitation, whatever, the freeze on the percentage of seats every state has should continue and redraw the boundaries within a state. That seems to be the solution at this point of time.
So you're saying it will have no impact on the voter?
It will have no impact on the percentage.
On the voter? How will the voter?
It might become a big issue. We don't know.
Yeah. No, it will, sorry.
No, please.
There will be a difference. Every Lok Sabha constituency in UP then will have much more voters than a Lok Sabha constituency in Tamil Nadu. Because you are going to keep Tamil Nadu's 39 seats intact in that method and redistribute the boundaries of the 39 seats within Tamil Nadu. So every Tamil Nadu Lok Sabha seat will have the more or less same number of voters. But from one state to another, there will be a difference.
Sir, is lack of level playing field also one reason for increase in reservation and casteism in voting patterns and in voting?
Yes, I mean, any kind of...
Will there be an end to this? Will it ever, will we rise out of this?
That's a different question, but affirmative action is usually proposed because of the lack of a level playing field. And it happens in different ways. Women's reservation, also the same reasons. Right? There are serious entry barriers for you to participate, so we need to give you a heads up, etc., etc. We don't know, right? I mean, it's, when it comes to backward caste reservations, OBC reservations, it's clear that every 10 years the list has to be revised. But it's not being revised for all kinds of reasons.
Okay, quickly we'll take your last comment and we'll close. Yes. Samita Arni, your last, your closing remarks.
I'm also curious about this, what we talked about, this electoral bond issue and why it hasn't played out more. So that is also something that it is to keep in mind also with these structural changes that we've been talking about.
Okay. Doctor?
I think for me the message that comes out is the Indian voter has become more complex, more sophisticated, and has the capacity to be able to assert what they would like to say and do, and that is the strength of the Indian democratic process.
Dr. Gowda?
There is an opposition politics shaping up, but I think part of the difficulty of that taking off until now is that there is a lack of a vision. What kind of an India do you stand for? I mean, if this India you don't like, what is the vision? And a vision needs to be worked out. And we haven't seen it even emerge closely. And I think it's difficult for you to appear to be an alternative force without a vision of what kind of a country do you want to see emerge under your thing.
Mr. Murthy, your concluding remarks.
Post last 2019 elections, the primary narrative was the Balakot. We don't see anything of that type happening in the current scenario. I think, see, voters always vote in anticipation of doing something or getting something, not as a result of it in these circles. These are more emotive issues. The very fact that BJP is not playing Ram Mandir in a big way across the country, at least that is what we see down the south, itself primarily tells me that they don't want to pitch it too hard on the voters. I think the ground seems to be shifting, and as I indicated, like 2014, the major chunk of the India voted in a anti-corruption mode. 2024, I think a big chunk, if not the whole, is also going to vote on the anti-corruption agenda, even though not asserted in a big way by the India coalition, which is yet to happen. We see the ground going across, and I think this is an election which I could compare more with 2014 than 2019. 19, Balakot fundamentally dominated the 19 narrative. We don't have such a thing today. I think the people mostly are going to vote on livelihood and the corruption part.
So one last question I would like to ask you. How do you all see the BJP perform in the South? Given the shifts between the regional parties, AIDMK versus DMK, BRS's TDP, in Kerala, UDF and LDF, do you see BJP gaining grounds in that? Or do you see this itself as a kind of a systematic way for the party to gain inroads? What is your assessment?
I'll answer that. See, one size fits all as a narrative. BJP fundamentally believes in one size fits all. South has been their, the harder side for them for the last 10 years. I think BJP is learning South now. And last about 1 to 2 years, you see these partnerships, very unlikely partnerships that they cut deals with all the parties almost. This was, as a surprise, this time they went with the JDS of Karnataka, which they've been at loggerheads practically for decades. So I wouldn't say not much of a gain that I would see for BJP in the current context, but as effort, they've made a great effort. But then fundamentally as an outcome, I don't see them gaining anything more. It's a net loss for them.
Okay, so we are running short of time. We'd like to answer that question more elaborately, but we'll come back to that question. So thank you for joining us on this wonderful program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.